You're back with The Nation, and we'll pick up where we left off with Economic Development Minister Steven Joyce, who's with us in studio talking about issues of economic growth. We touched just before the break on how we can grow capital. Labor has been suggesting for some time that the best way to do that, one of the best ways, is capital gains tax.
Sort of ironic, isn't it?
Well,
so you're sort of on the one hand saying you need more capital investment in New Zealand, and your way to do it is to tell them that you'll be taxing them more
it takes
if they try and get the benefit of putting that capital into New Zealand.
So you're saying not capital itself.
Well, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, Alex. You're playing with semantics at this point. The reality is it would be taxing capital. So you're saying to somebody, oh, you can invest in New Zealand, and we want you to invest in New Zealand more than you have historically, but we want to tax you more for the investment in New Zealand. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's not the way to encourage capital growth in this country.
Isn't it more about levelling the playing field so that housing and property...
So they're not proposing to do that. What they're proposing to do
we'll do a proper capital gains tax then.
Well, no, they're not.
How would that? The Prime Minister likes the idea of a proper capital gains tax if you were to impose
we've been down that path in terms of the savings working group. We've addressed it. We've actually dealt with the issues that have been giving people windfall gains from second properties and those sorts of situations by removing the depreciation issues and by dealing with the taxation issues. That's actually having a very significant impact, and nobody's right now saying that the investment property business in New Zealand is in a bubble at this point in time. So I would argue that we've addressed it, and the focus now has to be on encouraging capital investment in this country. And I tell you for free, you don't encourage capital investment by telling them you're going to tax them more.
So you don't think that there's any issue any longer with over-investment in property in this
Certainly
country?
Not at this point, no. In
so
fact,
there's no need to redirect capital away from property?
No, I think the reality is that has been done at this stage. I mean, you always look 5 years down the line. But the big issue, and if you look around at the moment, is the potential for restriction on the availability of property in Auckland and Christchurch to actually drive up property prices through scarcity. And again, you don't actually hit property investment harder to actually deal with the scarcity issue. You actually have to deal with the issues that are there, which are in terms of availability of land, and that actually is something that really both councils are continuing to address.
Minister, the elephant in the room perhaps is our currency. Labor, David Parker, they're seeking advice on this. Shouldn't the government be doing the same?
Well, the reason they're seeking advice on it is because there is no answer to that question in terms of actually dealing with currency fluctuations of the type that we're seeing at the moment in the marketplace. So what have you got?
Talk to China, talk to Singapore.
Yeah, well, you might find, if you have a look, Alex, that we're a little smaller than China and a little smaller than the US in particular. And the challenge for a small country in that situation is what are you actually going to achieve by trying to stand against the actual currency prices that are there right now? And I'm sorry, it's a shibboleth, and it's actually voodoo economics to suggest that the solution to encouraging export in this country is to artificially change, or seek to artificially change, because there's no guarantee, and in fact every likelihood you wouldn't succeed, to seek to artificially change the exchange rate. Now, let's talk about exchange rates for a minute. What are they ultimately? They're a measure of the relative wealth of countries.
And they're being manipulated by foreign central banks printing money and investing money in New Zealand and Australian dollars. And you've got the Australian Reserve Bank board member Warwick McGibbon coming out last week and saying, well, we should be countering this. You know, this guy's a conventional economist.
Well, the reality of the situation is there's a reason why it's not happening is because it's basically taking a massive one-way bet against the markets, where you stand on one side and all the markets stand on the other. And we've seen that before. We've seen it with what the UK did way back. We've seen it in other markets as well. And if the markets take a view that's different to your Reserve Bank and decides to pile up against you, well, you're in for a hiding. And it's not an economic policy. That's basically trying to say we're struggling to get competitive rather than keeping working on it, rolling our sleeves up and getting competitive. And I would grant you that it's hard for some exporters at the moment, although I would also say, well, no, that's not actually correct, because there's a lot of exporters that are exporting into Australia very successfully. We have a low cross rate with Australia. And I would argue to you that actually the answer has to be to keep working, roll our sleeves up, improve our competitiveness. And frankly, Labor's solution as such is voodoo economics. It won't work and is actually complete. And Alex, you need to stop promoting it, because it's truly a waste of time.
There is an opportunity here, isn't there, with a new governor starting in a matter of weeks. And there must be a political consideration as well. I mean, exporters are probably more generally part of a National Party constituency. They're screaming about this. This is the number one issue for exporters consistently in all the surveys.
Sorry, John. It's most exporters I talk to, not all. There's some that would like to see the well, everybody would like to see the exchange rate lower, but most exporters I talk to understand that actually that's one thing you can't control. I was an exporter, I chaired an export company for 8 years. When I started out in exporting in 2001 or 2002, I can't remember what the US dollar rate was, but it was about 35 or 40 cents, and everybody said if it went to 50, we'd be broke. Well, that company today is dealing with a US dollar at 80-something cents because it has changed the way it does its business. It's innovated. It's got control over some of its intellectual property. It's got some very good arrangements internationally. It trades in different currencies than it did previously. And sadly, that is the only long-term sustainable opportunity. And one other point on the exchange rate: if you tried to intervene to artificially lower the New Zealand exchange rate, firstly, you're unlikely to succeed. Secondly, even if you were by some miracle to succeed and make a big enough difference, which I highly doubt, then all you'd be doing would be lowering our exchange rate relative to Australia still further and dealing with and creating another problem, which is more New Zealanders moving to Australia because the higher income.
Should the Americans not be doing it then?
The Americans are in a very different situation to us, and I'd rather have our set of problems right now than the American set of problems.
I want to talk to you, Minister, about the so-called New Zealand story. It used to be 100% pure New Zealand. That's still aligned with tourism. Is the reality that that brand has become something of an embarrassment or an impediment to this country?
No, it's just that we need a broader story for other parts of our export industries.
A more accurate story, perhaps?
Well, no, I disagree with that. In fact, that's just frankly a little bit of Green Party spin, because the reality is we actually have a very clean green environment relative to just about every other country in the world. But just going through the reasons why you'd want to consider a broader story, it doesn't say anything about innovative New Zealanders. It doesn't say anything about our unique Māori culture. It doesn't say anything really about our education system, unless the reason you're coming here is actually to go surfing on the weekend. It doesn't say anything about a whole range of things about New Zealand. So what we want to do is generate a broader New Zealand story that we can use across a range of industries, such as the dairy industry, whether it's the primary sector, whether it's the high value manufacturing sector, or whether it's education. Because you go and do what I did once and go and stand in downtown Shanghai and look around you and all the people there and think to yourself, how can a small country like New Zealand with 4.5 million people get a brand awareness with Shanghai, let alone the rest of China, that enables small Kiwi exporters to go in the door and tell a little story about New Zealand and what they mean and what they're about and what are their values and how do they work.
So that's what it's going to be then?
Well, it's going to be about innovation.
They were innovative.
It'll be part of the story. So if you go through the Rugby World Cup last year, there was a great video produced called New Zealand Natural Innovators, which combined elements of our scenery, combined elements of our innovation and our high-value products, and also had elements about Kiwis in their work and the way they relate to people. And so our challenges, and frankly the challenge for the brand people, because we won't be designing it here today, will be to actually draw that together into a coherent New Zealand story. And the fact that you can't tell that story suggests that there is a very good reason to come up with one.
Another challenge you face at the moment is the Resource Management Act for a number of reasons. Change, though, it seems, is in the wind, or has to be in the wind, really. Are you going to push through change to help accelerate some of these regionally significant projects? And by that I mean mining.
Well, we put it in our... Well, again, you jump straight to mining. I'll come to that in a second. But we put it in our manifesto last year, and we've been working on it since, so there'll be no surprises there. But yes, it is very important. So go back to that target of lifting from 30 to 40% over 13 years. We'll give you the example of Bathurst Resources down the West Coast, and you picked on mining. That one has been 7 years in the consenting process with appeals and millions of dollars. So the interesting thing now is, if we said, we've signed up to this target, and if the country signs up to this target tomorrow, the biggest challenge will be actually, assuming you can get the capital investment, is actually getting it invested over the next half dozen or 7 years. I mean, imagine if we said, okay, well, you can all start, we go and get some investors, we get them to look around, get into some projects, whether it's building factories or whatever, and then say to them, oh, by the way, you've got to wait 7 years. Well, there's no way you'll achieve your target for exports.
So you have to overhaul the Act,
We have to overhaul the Act, yes, we do. We have to get those processes shortened. And again, it's not necessarily about changing the answer, because often the answers come out pretty good. It's actually about the process and the length of the process that it takes to get to those answers, and the Bathurst one being one example. Now, in the Waterview project case, the roading case, we've managed, using the new national consenting process, to get through that process in under a year, with general satisfaction from both the proponents and the appellants to that case. And that's the sort of process that we really need to see. And that involved changes where appeals were only on legal technicalities and so on and so forth. And it's that sort of process. And Amy Adams is working on that at the moment. I understand she intends to bring some papers before Cabinet quite shortly, and then we'll get the opportunity to discuss that. But if you're going to have that sort of investment, you have to have a process which allows it to occur.
Attracting that private investment,
yeah.
Does that require ironing out the inconsistencies across local authorities? Because, you know, you've mentioned Taranaki moving forward. It's got a pretty forward-leaning council there generally, but it's not the case elsewhere in other parts of the country.
I'm glad you raised Taranaki because it's an interesting example. Their unemployment currently, you talked about our unemployment nationally, is about 6.8%. Taranaki's is 3.8%. It's the lowest in the country right now. One of the reasons it's that way is obviously the oil and gas industry. And it's not just the unemployment rate, it's actually the sort of incomes that people are earning in that industry. So the people that work at the Motunui Methanex plant, the methanol plant, just about all of them earn over $100,000 a year. So that feeds into the Taranaki economy. Now there's other regions, and John's right, there's other regions that could have that opportunity. So Hawke's Bay and the East Coast. So Gisborne, you know, is a region that struggles. There are oil and gas companies that want to explore there, and quite possibly the indications geologically are that they could be very similar sorts of regions to the Taranaki region. But we do need the councils to step up and say,
and will you stub them out? I mean, will you come over the top and say,
well, I think we'll try and take
regulatory overview of all councils.
No, I think what we're going to do is going to do improvement of the resource management process, and we've got them working with the Taranaki Regional Council to actually understand some of the challenges they face. Because to be fair to those councils, it's new to them. You know, Taranaki's had this for 40 to 100 years, whereas the Hawke's Bay and East Coast. But I think probably the bigger issue there is
shouldn't the government be doing it then, stepping in if the councils aren't experienced? Yeah.
Well, that's a possibility, and of course we have a national consenting process now, and any applicant now can go straight through to the environment.
Regional councils can set their own regulations about farming. Those are farmers in Otago now being told they can't use as much nitrogen as farmers in Taranaki.
And we're keeping a very close eye on those issues because, they've got to set limits. We've got to get intensification of agriculture, but we've also got to get improving environmental conditions, and that's challenging. It's possible, but it's challenging. And the way to do that is to work very closely with the councils. And I think you'll find that Amy Adams is working I know this for a fact, is working very closely with those regional councils, is sitting on the shoulder of the Otagos and the Canterburys and the Nelsons and the Wellingtons of the world to make sure that they are doing it the right way. And I think by staying close to them, we can ensure that that happens.
Is there a case for, a national environmental standards? Is there a case for that?
Well, we have got national environmental standards for nutrient.
But clearly they're quite specific, though. It'd have to be quite specific because there is so many inconsistencies between councils.
Well, it is the way to work through it. And so there's a combination of things. Firstly, the changes to the RMA. Secondly, working closely with councils. And thirdly, I'd have to say too, is at a population level, because after all, the councils respond to what they hear in their communities, is at a population level understanding the opportunity and the size of the prize. And for Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, the opportunity is very considerable. And again, I would come back to the point that I've been making for most of this year. You can't argue for more jobs in your region on the one hand, but then say, but no development, no oil and gas, no intensification of agriculture, none of these other things that would lead to jobs. And that's the debate we have to have, because there are reasons why regions like Taranaki are successful and reasons like Northland and Gisborne aren't. And the Honi Harawiras of the world can't sit up there in Northland and say, oh, it's terrible that our people are going over to Western Australia, but by the way, don't you mine in Northland?
Mr Joyce, when can we expect the next big report?
There'll be another one this week. It'll be in the innovation space, and then moving on from them, we'll be unfolding through the rest of the year. But again, they're progress reports to update business, and I think we're just going to see an emerging consensus of what needs to be done to actually achieve the results in this country.
All right, Steven Joyce, thank you very much for your time this morning. Alex Tarrant, John Hartevelt, thank you.